Let's talk about the various ways that information gets given to a large language model. They are training, prompt, and supplied documents. So large language models like ChatGPT interact with text in at least these three different ways. It's good to know the differences between them so you know what to expect. I'm going to use words like learn and memorize in what I say next, but it's not exactly the same way or at all how humans learn and memorize things. So think of them in kind of scare quotes or metaphorical ways. The knowledge of an LLM is stored in like 10 billion different numbers or 100 billion different numbers, sometimes a trillion different numbers that are called weights or parameters. How does that actually work in storing the knowledge? In some sense, nobody really knows. Um, Also, remember what we're talking about is LLMs here, generative AI rather than predictive AI. And we'll talk a little bit about predictive AI later. So LLMs aren't programmed with like, here's how English grammar works or French grammar or any grammar you care to name. They aren't explicitly programmed with that, and they aren't explicitly programmed with like a dictionary or something. They aren't explicitly programmed with like information from this biology textbook and this engineering textbook. Instead, they're just given huge amounts of text and kind of asked to figure it out. So they're given like everything from Wikipedia, a whole bunch of scholarly articles, but probably not those behind some paywalls. Um, any books that the company could find online copies of, and there are lawsuits out there as to whether various AI training companies violated copyrights. We'll talk about that more later. Basically anything on the internet, a web page that a company made or that a university made or a professor at a university or governance made or just random people on the internet, uh, stuff from internet discussion forums. So it's fed into the AI and then into the training for the AI. And then the numbers inside the LLM are adjusted so it does a good job of predicting basically what the next word is in a sentence. So it'll give it like half a sentence and it asks to predict the next word. Maybe it'll give almost the whole sentence, but one word missing in the middle, for example. Um, During that initial training, it's not really told what's right or wrong. So if someone made a wrong claim on Wikipedia, it's still trying to learn to predict the next word, even though that sentence might be wrong. That's because no team of humans could plausibly read through all these things and decide, okay, this thing was right, this thing was wrong. Um, so in some sense, it's learning what is the next thing this text will say, rather than what is the right thing to say next. And how much do you trust various internet discussion forums or random people's web pages to say good or correct things? So we have to think about all the stuff this was trained on and how much we trust it. Even disregarding the issue of data quality, as if we could ever do that, this training is kind of analogous to just a person growing up and going through K-12 education and maybe college education, and they're reading things and hearing things. Um, so some things might be so common that they get essentially memorized. Other things are retained in only kind of a hazy way. You probably have things you only hazily remember from K-12 or even college. Um, in particular, there's no attempt made in LLMs for them to record where they learned something. Like you probably personally know that the square root of 9 is 3, but where did you learn that? You maybe can envision the classroom, but do you remember the name of the textbook? Probably not. Do you remember the name of a famous person or experiment in your field? Probably. What textbook did you learn it from? Probably don't remember that. Um, by the way, you might think of Wikipedia as a huge trove of information, and maybe it's reasonably reliable in your field because there's a bunch of people out there being careful about who changes the articles, right? Um, but it's just tiny compared to the rest of the internet. All of Wikipedia's text can easily fit onto one standard laptop. So like even if you trust some of its stuff, it might get drowned out by all the other stuff that LLMs are trained on. Although some AI companies might say, okay, this text is more important because we know it comes from a more reliable source, if that's Wikipedia. Um, I don't know the details of training, but just keep in mind even if there's some high quality stuff in there, it doesn't necessarily, it might get drowned out by the noise, basically. Many LLMs have a cutoff date, like it was trained in this month, and so it doesn't know anything that was posted on the internet after that month. Um, this changes from model version to model version within the company, like ChatGPT 5 has a later cutoff date than ChatGPT 4. You can't expect an AI to know anything after that happened after its cutoff date, but some LLM companies supply a few important facts from after the cutoff date, them and might even update them each day, like what day is it today? It might tell the user, tell the LLM this user seems to be coming in from this city or this state. And it might supply some political information about what's going on with politics in the past month or something. So that's the basics of training. Now let's talk about prompting. So after an LLM is trained, users, you and me and companies and governments and such, are allowed to supply it with a prompt, like a sentence or a paragraph, maybe multiple paragraphs, maybe even a whole document. The LLM can see each essentially word in that prompt and can refer to like, oh, this word came after that one, or this word here at the end of the sentence really changes the meaning of the rest of the sentence. Um, but if the prompt gets too long, like thousands, millions of words, the oldest parts of it don't get included anymore. It only has a limited memory for prompts. Um, it's kind of similar to how a teacher might give you an essay prompt or a word problem in an exam or a homework. It's there in front of you. You can keep going back and reading it to see exactly what the professor said. But you can't go back and read the textbook that you were supposed to be reading last month, right? That's kind of more a part of the training data. Also, as you're writing things in response to the prompt, you can see what you've written. And so also for an LLM, it can see in detail what it has said so far to decide what it's going to say next. So that's what the LLM can see after training. It can see the prompt and the response so far. And then some LLMs, you can upload a document to them. And so the LLM can see all the words in that document that you uploaded, as long as it's not too long. Notebook LM is an example of that. And some LLMs can cite specific places in the document. So it's almost like a professor on an exam says, you can't use your textbook, but here's like a one-page summary of some science experiment, and then they give you a prompt about it. You can sit there and read that one-page summary in detail, um, and also look at the prompt as you're writing out your stuff. Or in the workplace, a supervisor might hand you a training manual or a bit of reading and say, use this while you're doing this task. Although that analogy is a little weak because usually a job isn't like closed book like an exam might be. The supervisor probably won't mind if you go grab other bits of reading to help you on the task, rather than just depending on your training in kind of maybe a hazy way on some details. So that was all about LLMs. What about predictive AI? Predictive AI does get trained on a data set, and the quality of that data set is important. Predictive AI doesn't get prompted with like sentences or paragraphs usually. Instead, we kind of prompt it with an image or a sound or a set of numbers that is kind of similar to what we trained it on. If we trained it on microscope images of yeast, we might give it a new microscope image of yeast and say, okay, do the outlining thing I trained you to do. It doesn't usually have a response so far, and predictive LM usually can't accept extra documents. Um, so in general, basically everything I'm putting in these videos is things that I personally have written. I want to disclose some use of AI in this one. I wrote the initial script. Of course, I strive for accuracy, so I pasted a draft of most of the initial script above into ChatGPT and asked it to critique it for accuracy. Overall, it made only a small handful of change suggestions, and of course, I used my human mind to think about, okay, yeah, that one's good, that one maybe not so important. I made some relevant changes. You can see the chat log if you want. You can go in the logbook here and get the link. There is something worth commenting about, though, and that's on the issue of whether copyright was violated when making the training data for LLMs. My original phrasing included the phrase some or many regardless of copyright. ChatGPT, when it was critiquing my script for accuracy, remember ChatGPT was created by the company OpenAI, it said that my phrase there is speculative and legally loaded. It gave OpenAI's position on describing the training data. It said, hey, you might be inaccurate. You might invite legal debates, which is maybe possibly saying you might be opening yourself up to liability. It offered a suggested phrasing. And I stopped and thought about that. So I changed the phrase up above that I said that some lawsuits allege that copyrights were violated. That is a fact that I can back up with citations like this article from Reuters. Um, so you could go read about the lawsuits there. Let's notice that these suggested language that ChatGPT provided, and even what it said here, did not mention the fact that there is a controversy. It just reported the point of view of its company, not the point of view of other people. It didn't mention the lawsuits. Isn't that curious? Um, it did say that maybe this is a distraction from the main pedagogical point. And I agree the copyright issue is a distraction from my main point right now about training, but it is a big point about ethics and AI, and we will be discussing it later this semester.